All right, well, I guess I'll probably get started. Alex is going to screen share my brief concept of a presentation. But for a quick housekeeping as well, bathrooms are down the corridor to the right, as far as I imagine. There are drinks at the back here as well, and more than welcome to help yourself too. But yes, tonight is BrisPHP. We've given up on trying to do quarterly because we end up finding we organize one and then it rolls over to the next quarter. So this is just number 2. It's easier numbering scheme. Tonight we're in the offices of Credit Sense. Thank you very much for putting on obviously the location as well as the drinks, and found you as sponsored with the pizza tonight as well. Next. Hey, it worked. As always, you can follow us on Twitter, I guess. We don't really post. Maybe Nathan will tonight, his quarterly Twitter post. More importantly, though, is that GitHub repository for the meetup. So if you have an idea of something you want to hear or something talk that you want to propose, you can jump onto the meetup and just create like an issue on the meetup for that. It's kind of the easiest way. There's actually a ton of talks requested on there, because if you haven't already done it, BrisPHP.com/pizza. When you have to fill out the thing to win a voucher, you're prompted to enter like what sort of talk you're after. So if any of those take your fancy and you'd like to do a presentation, that's a good place to find stuff that people are already interested in. So tonight, Nathan is in the top left-hand corner, sick at home. So I'll be doing his What's New on PHP Land talk. You'll be pleased to know I got the slides about 10 minutes before I left home, so it's very well prepared.
It doesn't look safe.
And then Stephen's doing a talk on sensibility security in PHP, which sounds actually really cool from like a practical sense. And then we're doing something a little bit different tonight. We're going to have 4 different essentially speakers going to give a quick background on sort of their deployment process, the stuff that happens in their organization, and then it's going to turn around to questions about sort of picking the actualities and the realities of deploying PHP in production, all the weird and wonderful ways that can be done. So last time, BrisPHP.com/pizza. Enter to win 5 $20 AWS vouchers and a JetBrains voucher as well if you haven't done already, and we'll pick it up later. But otherwise, we good to start, Steve? Actually, no. Oh, I've got to do that first, don't I? This is fun. This is not my computer. Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
Can I have the other presentation now?
Oh, which other presentation?
I just remembered I have to do Nathan's story.
Oh, Nathan's story. All right. That's a really good question. What's new in PHP land?
That's the one.
There you
right
go.
there.
Oh, that one. The thing, that's your presentation.
So as I said, I had a whopping 10 minutes to prepare this, but hopefully it is okay. So pretty expected stats to be seen here. So again, just more PHP 8 being rolled out. It's good to see actually that many people picking up 8.1. Probably a sign that with sort of more modern deployment techniques and stuff, people are probably sort of picking up newer versions sooner, which is great. And it is really interesting to see that, one, it's great to see that 5 is dying, but even 7.4 got like a lot of people using it, even if it is, I think Nathan was saying it's like 5 months left of support for it. It's still good to see that it's like people have moved up to a sort of the latest version before, just in case there are, for them, BC breaks in 8 they can't get onto yet. But you do see a pretty rapid growth in 8 again, but it all looks like pretty standard for PHP, I think. So this one's cool. This is getting into the what's new in 8.2. So sometimes if you have a stack trace, you got personal information in that, or a password, those sort of things, and you don't want it to go to your login. There's this new attribute you can add to a parameter. So say you had an example like this, a function called password hash that did a var dump and debug, which probably wouldn't do. That is then just going to reveal hunter2 as the password there. But now you can pop on the sensitive parameter attribute, and it will replace that with this like special object sensitive parameter value. It's unclear whether that is like picked up in more places. I'm just going to imagine it's places that you directly annotate with you. I'm not checking who these stuff.
You worked with us, right?
Okay. Yeah, I'll go see if it becomes a problem. So yeah, that one's pretty interesting. It'll be interesting to see whether that actually gets picked up by many places, but I imagine like integrations with logging, like entry or something like that, would probably encourage using those things. This is one that who here actually uses named capture groups? Sorry, who here uses regex a lot? Good. One of the strong ones. I love regex. People really hate it, but I think it's awesome. But who uses named capture groups that often? It's not really something that I particularly reach for that often. There's kind of a weird API when you use preg match with capturing groups as well as named groups. So in this contrived example from Nathan, the first result returned from preg match is essentially the whole match, everything that matched. And each of the matches come out through there, but the name group also appears in the same array with the key of the name of the group. So anyway, they added on as a flag modifier /n at the end of your preg match call, or your regex pattern more specifically. And that then means that it only returns the sort of full match again, and then the named groups only. So that final B didn't get returned because it's not a named group. I don't know. Maybe that's useful to people, but it's probably not. Peak memory usage. So if you're calling to see what the peak memory usage is, if you function, if you actually clear the memory, it's still not resetting the peak, which kind of makes sense. If you think about from a PHP request response, whole process dies sort of thing, it would probably make sense that you didn't really need a function to clear that. If you think about long-lived PHP and those sort of things, you do want a function like memory reset peak usage, which actually then resets that memory peak thing that is stored so that it can get sort of the latest since that last reset, kind of like you would with a stopwatch in most other ways that you measure your application. So again, I think probably makes more sense in a long-lived PHP. And then the one that's probably going to be spicy in open source is read-only classes. So we already have the ability to add attributes or the read-only property to properties in your object. Yes, you can come in. This largely operates like basically making the entire class or object read-only with some fun little gotchas about all the properties must be typed and you can't have dynamic properties. The fun bit that will be potentially spicy in open source, I would say, is that you can't really opt out and work around that, and that any child classes of that class are also read-only. So again, possibly some opinionated developers can go along. And sort of, again, there's probably a lot of use cases for this, but just having a specific type for true. So instead of returning a bool, something always returns true, I guess, because it could return an exception or throw an exception instead, I guess. So as you'd imagine, true is the opposite of false, and it can't union with false or bool because then it would just be bool. And it can't intersect with anything because then it would just be true, I think is how it works. So that's cool, I guess. Again,
It sounds very convincing.
thank you. Lots of preparation. And in Nathan's words, UTF-8, these encode functions, deprecated because they actually don't do what they said they do. They come with sort of some bonus opinions on there. They actually convert between Latin 1 and UTF-8, or more specifically ISO 88591, which we all know is Latin 1. So yeah, I think the option is to use something more specific. That time. Questions? We can field them to Nathan if you have any. Anyone have any questions? Cool. So you're presenting from the order. Sweet. So now we'll have Stephen.
Hi. So, better start. I haven't done this talk in a while, and last time I did it was online. So I haven't actually done it in person. So fingers crossed it's all going to work out. And when I looked at it a couple of days ago to refresh my memory, I realized most of my notes were incomplete. So I spent the day listening to my old talk to wrap my head around it. But feel free to interrupt at any point if you've got any questions. If there's anything you want me to clarify, anything doesn't make sense. Hopefully it will all make sense, and by the end you will be terrified and want to leave the IT industry completely. So yeah, this is one of these talks that I started. This is actually the sequel to my Think Like a Hacker talk, which started because I did a talk about cleaning infected WordPress sites. And at the end of it, people came up to me and said that they weren't sure if they wanted to come because they thought they were going to have nightmares and be scared. This was at a WordPress conference. But that talk wasn't supposed to scare people. It was supposed to just be informative and interesting. So I said about writing a talk to scare people, and that was Think Like a Hacker. This is the sequel, which is also supposed to scare you. So fingers crossed you're all scared. By the end, it's going to work. It's all one giant demo as well. So again, lots of fingers crossing. Okay, so have you ever wondered why we hash passwords when we store them? Why don't we just, throw them straight into the database? Because it's not a usability thing. It's not a simplicity thing. It's not an elegance thing. If you think about it, it's complicated. We grab the password, we send it to the server, we run it through an intentionally complicated function that generates some other random string, and that we save. This is when we register the user. And login is even better, because when we want to log in a user, we grab their username and their password, then we have to grab the password out of the database, or the password hash out of the database we already have, extract out of that the salt and the work factor and the other information that we need to generate the hash, generate a new hash based off the password they've just given us, then compare it. It's really complicated. So why do we do it? Well, the answer, as hopefully you all know, is security. But what aspect of security? Because it's not immediate security. If you think about it, when someone's logging in, they're typing their password in plain text into the browser. So if you have control of the browser, you can grab their password. It's sending the password to the server, but the password's being sent in plain text. Sure, the connection is encrypted, but if you can get into that connection, you've got the password. And when it hits the server, it's still not hashed, it's still not protected, it's still in plain text, which means that if you're listening on the server, you can grab the password. Eventually it'll hit the application will hash it and throw it in the database, but that's at the very end. So there's no security benefit to hashing passwords immediately. But we do it because if the application gets breached at some point in the future and they get access to the user table in the database, if we haven't hashed the passwords, they're going to have a list of all the email addresses and all the passwords that work for those email addresses, and then use those email addresses and passwords to log into every other website that the user has an account at, because everyone reuses their passwords, right? And so we hash passwords to protect against the unfortunate event that our site is breached, to protect everyone else's sites. So we're adding in a layer of security. We're adding in defense in depth, as it's called, to make it harder for, if something bad happens, makes it harder for worse things to happen from that. And that's kind of what the talk is about today, is looking at things from the perspective of the hacker's already broken in. So the hacker has breached the website and they're playing and looking around and seeing what they can find. And we want to see, how far they can get and what they can do, and look at ways of stopping that access so they can only break into our site and can't get further than that. So as I mentioned before, this is the sequel to my last talk, and it ended off on this page. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. There's an no, it did end on this page. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done that one. But end on this page, and this page has an SQL injection vulnerability in this box. And so we can exploit that. Oops, wrong terminal. Where is it gone? Here. So we can exploit that vulnerability. And I used last time I did this with multiple screens, so I'm just going to cheat and do this with a tool called, okay, let's get back into the server. When I let this in, then I'll use the tool. Yay, it works. Okay, awesome. So this is SQL map, which is an SQL injection tool that you use for doing SQL injection attacks on websites. And you point to a website and it'll try and find a vulnerability and it'll have a look around and use all sorts of tricks. If you notice at the top, it's saying here we're using a Boolean-based blind and a time-based blind, which means that this page, when it has the vulnerability, it's not actually outputting anything. So it's using timing tricks to determine each of the different characters in order to load the information. And so exploiting this vulnerability on the page has given us all of these databases on the server. Now, this is the site that we've actually exploited the vulnerability on. But you can see here we've got a forged database, we've got Laravel security, there's Stephen Rees-Carter with extra veg. There's a whole bunch of different databases that we can access through this user on this application. And if we want to take a peek at the forge user, because why not? Forge tables. So we're now going to tell MySQL, SQL map to find all the tables in the forge database. Wait for it. And we've found a secrets table. So this is a secrets table in a completely different application that has nothing to do with the application we've attacked, but because they're sharing database credentials, we can now read the database table, read the data in it, and grab all the information. So the fix for this is pretty simple, and it's use a different database user for each database, for each application. So if we jump over to Forge, where's Forge gone? And environment. So I'm just using Laravel Forge as an example because it's really easy to visualize this stuff and move around on the servers. None of these vulnerabilities are specific to Forge. They're all things that you will find in all sorts of different deployment methods and ways that you set things up. So in our environment, as you can see here, we're using the Forge username and we're using the password that comes with it as well, which means that every other account, this Forge user on this site can access all the other databases. So if we get rid of that one and we enable our one I prepared earlier, specific user for this site and a different password and go save. And being a live demo, of course, Forge is going to take forever. It really is going to take forever. Yay. And then need to do a deploy as well, just to bump the caches and things. When we go back into the command line when it's finished deploying, get a better view of the deploy over here.
Question while it deploys.
Yep.
So when it's blind, that means it can't get the error out.
Yes.
So how is it able to extract information if it can't get concerned?
So if it's there are the two ways you could do it, or the two main ways you do it. One is if you get like an error code in a failure state and then a non-error code, you can do conditions where if the first character is A, it's valid, and if the first character isn't A, then it's going to throw an error. And you also do it timing based as well. So you can add a sleep or a delay in. So if the first character is A, then wait 5 seconds. You wouldn't use that. That's a really extreme example. But a tool like SQL map uses all these different tricks and can check the timing down in like milliseconds and that sort of level in order to evaluate what the characters are. And it literally goes through character by character of all the strings. On a fast connection, it's hard to see, but you might have remembered when that loaded, it actually loaded them not in order. I noticed the E, C, and R are loaded before anything else in that. And that's it, figuring out character by character. So if you're dumping the whole database, it's going to take a while and it's going to produce a lot of noise in your logs if you're logging the request, but it's going to get the data eventually. So deployment's gone through. If I go back in here now and ask what databases there are, and you watch this, yep, see that floating, slowly? So that's pulling it character by character. Now we've only got those two databases in there because that's the database we connected to for that user. So that's how to solve that sort of problem. Now, your developer, when they were building this site, was obviously having a problem with getting something to work. Maybe they were trying to do it from their phone, and so they needed to see the logs and needed to see them quickly. So they added in this simple page, just /logs, and we've got all the output from the log file, so they can easily see what's going on here. Obviously, not hard to guess. And they figured, you know, it's just outputting the logs. What's the worst that can happen? You can't do anything on this page. But if you look at the top, you'll notice they've dumped the path here, which is interesting. This is the sort of thing that you look for when you're trying to compromise a site or look for vulnerabilities, is that the information that it provides you, does it hint at something? And you can probably guess from here that if we're dumping out the path to the log file, they wanted to know what the log file path is, and it's the path it's reading. And maybe that means it's dynamic. So you could do some guessing and try some things. And if we put file there and double dot, it's now changed the output and it's changed the URL. So now we can see that we're telling it what file to read. Since we can do that, we might as well just read the configuration file. So that's the end file for the site. As you can see here, we have our database credentials. We updated on it before. We also have the application encryption key, which is fantastic for spoofing all sorts of stuff. We've got down here some AWS credentials, pusher key. So this is a gold mine for the information that we want to be able to break into the site and to do some more exploiting and see what else we can find. So we'll grab the access keys, the AWS keys, and I've got a block here that I prepared earlier because it's easier than pasting it in. Terminal, paste. Okay, so we're going to do that and connect in. Okay, access denied. So these keys are obviously old. They're not working on the site, but that's okay. If you remember, there was this funky URL here as well, which I'm not sure why they would put their secret copy of credentials on their website, but hey, they have exposed log files, so why not? Obviously, they had a reason. So if you go to that, but there's nothing here. Is there? Anyone see what this is?
Submit form.
Nope. Okay. So what this here is, and if you haven't noticed it yet, it's a canary token. Any looks of recognition in the room? Okay, so have you heard of the thing, or a canary in the gold mine, canary in the mine, where you miners will take canaries and birds down with them into the mines, and if the birds start having problems or if they die, then there's a problem with the air and you want to get out. Well, a canary token is the digital equivalent. And so this URL here is a canary token, which means that every time it gets loaded with this unique key, it's going to send an alert. And if I jump over to my emails, here we have here, your canary token was triggered. We can see here the HTTP token was triggered. That's the same key we saw. The reminder, that's the talk name, it's the web, and that's the IP address to access from. And I can go in here, more information, and we have this handy map of all the times this canary token has been visited. You can see from the date here, most of these hits are from when I gave the talk in Feb at Laracon Online. And then we've got one from earlier today when I was testing the talk, and then the one that I just pinged it then. And so this is, and it sent me an email telling me exactly this when someone found this page, which is fantastic from an alerting point of view. Now, if I jump back in here, and I wonder if this is coming yet, it's not coming yet. So the AWS keys that we tried are also a canary token. The problem with those ones is because they go through AWS system, it takes up to 2 to 30 minutes to come through, which is terrible for a talk when you do, 30-minute talk, if it's going to take 30 minutes. So looks like AWS isn't being nice to us today, but you'll get a similar sort of report of what commands they ran. And again, so someone's found your config file. Where has it gone? Here. Yeah, where'd it go? Someone's found the config file and they're trying the keys. We now know that someone has access to our configuration and they're trying to access our data.
Is that the AWS keys in particular? Is that like an AWS thing or canary tokens?
No, it's all canary tokens. So in canary tokens, which is canarytokens.org, completely free service. Anyone can sign up for a token and create them. And there's a bunch of different token types you can create. So you've got web URL, web bug, you've got DNS, AWS keys, Microsoft Word, Excel.
So do they generate like tokens in their system essentially?
Yes. Yeah, so they generate a token. And there's MySQL dump. So let's grab I don't know, MySQL dump, and then you put an email address or a webhook URL in there. Create my token, and there we go. It's now given us the MySQL dump. We can download the file. And so the way it works is for all those different types of tokens, they've figured out a way to get an alert whenever something interacts with it. So if it's a file like a PDF file or a Word file, when it opens up, there's an embedded thing in that file that pings that. For the MySQL dump, there is something in here, I don't know how it works, that actually sends them a ping when someone tries to restore this dump. It's a pretty clever trick they discovered. And so they get a notification and they send out the notification to your email address telling you that something has happened. If we go in here, here is the keys have finally gone through. So this is from when I used those AWS keys before. I'm just telling us here, telling the command that was run. AWS keys are different to the other ones in that they run through AWS's infrastructure because of how the system works, which is why there is the delay. All the other ones are instant because it goes straight to them. But as we can see, we can check again where when it loads. Come on, internet. There we go. Again, we've got the same map. We can see here the hits. So only my house and my server in Singapore are the ones that are hitting the canary token. No one else apparently has watched the recording from last time and decoded the keys, which actually surprised me because these keys are in my recording from my lab. I honestly thought people were going to translate them out and try and hit them before realizing what they were.
Wasn't listening to the full talk, but like,
Yeah,
sat there,
exactly.
paused and typed out the keys. And go, oh,
Exactly. I'm so disappointed I haven't had any pings from it. It's just, yeah. And none of you are apparently doing that either. I mean, last time I did this talk, I had a whole bunch of pings in my inbox before I had a chance to really talk about it. Anyway, so that's canary tokens. I love them. I use them all the time. All of my sites have canary tokens hidden everywhere. You can also like grab the AWS keys and put them in a file on your local development environment as well. So if someone hacks your computer and is looking for your keys to like your company's production environment, they will find the canary token keys and then they'll send you a ping. Fantastic things. I love them. And they're completely free to create. You don't need an account or anything. I could talk about them for hours. So, you know. Moving on. What was next on my list? Okay.
Steve, are you able to increase the font on the terminal?
The terminal font, make it bigger.
Yeah. Thank you.
There, is that what you want to say?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Now we can still use tokens.
I can put them in the. I don't think I have a chat here, but I'll paste them in the chat if you really want me to.
I think we can make it bigger.
This one bigger. You can double click on the.
I think it is because it's already full screen and it's already pinned.
Yeah.
Like there. I don't know if it goes.
Double clicking on it sometimes maximize stuff. Although I guess that's probably the whole screen, isn't it?
Yeah. You're right. A bit bigger.
Sorry, I forgot to check at the start how the font is. But yeah. Feel free to interrupt me at any point if you need me to make it even bigger.
That's about as big as.
Cool. Okay, cool. What was next? Okay, in my last talk, one of the vulnerabilities in this application was remote code execution through a cookie, which is lots of fun, but it takes a few steps. So I've introduced RCE through this box, remote code execution through the box, just to make it simpler. But in essence, this is what you would do through that cookie vulnerability or any other similar remote code execution vulnerability. So that one worked through object deserialization attack, which if you haven't heard of, it's where in PHP you can serialize objects and serialize data. And it's like JSON, only it contains all the different information about the variables and it can take objects as well. And then when you deserialize it, it turns that string back into an object. You can abuse this in order to make it run whatever PHP code you want, which gives you remote code execution on the server. And we can do that using a tool called PHP GGC. Just grab that. PHP generic gadget chains is a little tool for generating these payloads in order to do remote code execution on PHP applications. And then I want to split screen this thing. Oh, that's not overly helpful. Okay, over here, where's it gone? There. Okay, cool. So if I paste my code in here, is that readable over here? It's kind of a little bit blurry. So we've got the command up here, I'll highlight it. And this is the command we're running. We want to tell it to use the Laravel RCE6. So they've got different versions of payload that can be generated. And this is using the one they nominated RCE6. And what it's going to do is it's going to run, so run exec, and then it's going to run a bash command to do a remote shell connection to that IP address on port 1234. So I'm telling it I want to turn this, I want to run this command through the attack, and it's generated this string here, which is the PHP object string, which we're going to use in deserialization. So I've got a bunch of classes in here that it uses, like the message bag, you've got pending broadcast, dispatcher, eval loader. which sounds ominously named. And so it chains all those different classes in order to run the code it wants to run. So they've figured out how to exploit these classes in Laravel, in a standard Laravel application, to get this attack, which is why serialization is such a dangerous tool. It's really, really easy to find these chains in a large application. Okay, so I'm going to grab that and pump it in the box because that box is vulnerable to remote code execution through this attack. Previously, you would have encoded that as the cookie and then uploaded that cookie, but there's a few more steps in there. And the other thing we want to do is grab the server's, what's it called? You can't type. Public key. Lots of just white text, don't need to read that too much. Okay, so the public key for this account, and I want to run a listener. So we want to listen on port 1234 on my jump box. Then on here, I'm going to run the command. And in here, we now have a remote shell onto the server, all through that remote code execution. Nice and easy. As you can see here, the various files in there. And the best bit is, since we have that public key, we're just going to throw it into, oops, oh, I can't use tab. I'm sorry, going to type of this.
Just install tab autocomplete. Well, yeah.
Well, it's a reverse shell. It doesn't have tab. Okay. Hopefully that works. If I jump back out, what are you doing? Of course, live demo, never going to work. Okay, Forge. Jump box. Okay, now, in theory, if this worked, what's the address? There we go. Okay, so if in theory, if this worked, we have, I've added the SSH key from my jump box into the application that I was trying to break into. Oops, I should be able to get into it. Let me in. No, okay, so the key didn't work. Let's try that again. Okay, back in there. And then to save me having to copy paste, I have one I prepared earlier. Down here. Bingo, okay. I now have an SSH connection into the compromised server. Go away, there we go. And that prompts, I guess, full screen for you. You're going to, there we go. Is that readable? I think not, cool. Okay, so using that remote code execution vulnerability on the web page, which was through the cookie in the last talk, I've now added my key onto that server and I can now SSH straight in. So I now have full access to this user on this server to do whatever I want. So if you're familiar with Forge, you'll know that the sites live in subfolders within the user account. So we've got the 3 folders here, default, which is the default site. Got Laravel security here and Rees-Carter.net. So if I look in the Laravel security folder, we can see we have another application. This isn't the application I broke into, but it's sitting in the same user on the server, so I have access to it, including, oops, and I can do tab in here now, yay. Except I can't type. Okay, I didn't see it into the directory. Okay, so here's our configuration files for that other application. So we can now read their AWS keys. And there's also a mail address here, which is pretty obviously a canary token. But again, you can have email addresses as canary tokens. And we've got a database password, not too interesting, we've got that one already. Another application key. And the point is that we have access to all the other sites on this server because they're all running as a user. Okay, so how do we fix this problem? Well, oops, that's not ruining my punchline. Okay, so how we fix this problem is, I'm going to do it through Forge, but again, this isn't a Forge specific thing. It's just easy to demonstrate in Forge, but what we want to do is have our different sites isolated from each other. So when we're on the server, we want to create a new site. In here, let's go another site.com. We've got this little tick box down here, use website isolation. And what this does is it tells Forge to create the site as a completely different user on the server, which has its own permissions and its own access. So I'll run that now, and it's going to install the site. Jump back over to here. And if I look in the home directory, okay, it hasn't created yet, but just give it a minute. because everything runs slow today.
You'd really think that checkbox would be on by default. Hey?
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But it's not. So yeah, by default the checkbox is off, so it just puts everything in the subdirectories, which isn't secure. And there's no real overhead that I'm aware of to having it as a separate thing. So I don't know why they do it. Okay, as we can see, we've got the new site here now, another site.com, running as a separate user in this machine, in this server, which means that it's isolated from the other sites. So we'll jump over into that user. Okay, and then we can create our site in here. This is our new user. And if I want to, if I gain access to this site, so if I've compromised another site.com rather than the one I did compromise, I want to have a poke around, or I can see we've got a Forge user and a with extra veg user. But if I go and look in Forge, it's going to give me permission denied. And again, for the other account in there with extra veg. So I've broken into another site.com, but I can't access the other sites that are running on the server. I can't read their configuration. I can't get to their databases as long as they're not sharing database credentials. And so this significantly increases the security of this site because I can't travel around to whatever else is there. If you want to increase even further and put someone on a separate server, there is always a risk in hosting multiple sites on the same server. That's just inherent because there are ways of moving around depending on if there are weaknesses in the configuration or that sort of thing, and just shared resources in general. So, ideally throw it on a separate server, but isolate the accounts if you do need to have them on the same server. Okay, now I just want to pause here. And did anyone notice what I just did? Did I sneak it all past you, or did someone not pick it up?
Plugged in as root.
What was that?
You were in there as root.
I wasn't in there as root, but you're on the right track. Let me go back a step.
Sudo, yeah.
I ran sudo. Did anyone see me type the password?
No.
Nope. So I broke into this site using remote code execution, created my own SSH key, logged in via SSH, and I have sudo access to the site, which means now I'm root. No passwords. I can do whatever I want. Doesn't matter about website isolation if the user you're logging into has sudo without a password. And without a password it's only there to annoy the person that wants to do root commands. It's not going to do anything else because you're going to discover there's no password. There's no point having it. No point running sudo. Logging in is not root if you're going to have no password on your sudo account. But, and feel free to not put your hand up if you're embarrassed, but put your hand up if you've ever done this before. Yeah, I used to do this all the time, and then I realized the error of my ways. See, it's very common to do, but it's a big problem, especially on a server. Maybe on a local development machine where you're ultimately root anyway, or you control the device, it doesn't matter. But on a server, you don't turn off your sudo password, please. Been there, done that.
Local machine has sudo password and the servers don't.
What was that, sorry?
The irony is local machine has sudo password because the servers don't.
Yeah, I just want to point out, Forge doesn't do that by default. That's something that I changed. So yeah, don't want to give an impression that Laravel Forge gives sudo without password. It does, and it generates a nice big beefy password as well. That's something that I weakened for the demo. Okay, so now we're root. We get to have more fun. Apt install. Okay, so Nmap is a network mapping tool, yes, which you can use for looking around networks and scanning ports and finding things to play with. And because we're root, we can now install whatever we want on the server. We're going to have a look around and see what we can do. We want to see if this server maybe has access to other servers and other networks. So we look at the network connections. We've got this one up here, H0. There's our IP address. That's the public IP address. That's completely boring because that's the internet. We've already got access to that. But we've got a second IP address here. This server has access to a virtual network or an internal network or something like that. So I can grab that, shove it into Nmap. Nice one. Okay, shove it into Nmap, and it should take about 16 seconds. Given the timing of everything else today, it's going to take about 25. And I'm using GRC before Nmap because it makes it nice and colorful and easy to see. That's its whole purpose. It just makes output colorful on commands. Oh, 17 seconds, not bad. Okay, so Nmap has found 3 servers that we can connect to on this network. We've got this one up here. Notes, sorry. This one up here is kind of boring. All they've got is SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, standard web server. The one at the bottom, mostly boring, but we've got MySQL is open as well, which is interesting and shouldn't be open because if you can get to MySQL directly, then you could try and break into the account or something. But granted, it's on an internal network, so it's probably just a shared resource. But this one has got FTP, Telnet, NetBIOS and Microsoft DS are both for Samba. You've got LDAP, MySQL. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that's open, which means we could then pivot into that server. So Telnet's the big one that jumps out. There's a good chance there's no password, and we could Telnet straight onto that server and do whatever we wanted. And the other services as well. If they're running older versions, there could be a vulnerability we can exploit to get further. So the point is that we broke into this website during that remote code execution. We've gained access to root, and now we can get into multiple servers in the network. Maybe that's the entrance to their DMZ. Now we can get into the corporate network, root around their internal servers. We potentially have full access to every single piece of information this company has, all through that simple vulnerability.
Sorry to ask a silly question, but is that
Yep.
is that the ports that are open on the machine that we're accessing right now, or has it actually done a port scan?
It's done a port scan on all the servers in that internal network.
that are connected to it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So to give some
There's no
context,
IPs there, so how do you do it?
what the IP address is?
Yeah.
Up here. So this one here is 10.104.02. It should highlight them, but it doesn't. 10.104.04. And down here, app server. So app server is the one that we actually broke into, which is running the websites. This one here is actually my jump box, which is the one where I was hacking from. I just installed a bunch of services in order to make the demo interesting. None of them are set up, so they're probably all really good. But yeah, it proves the point. But yeah, they're all separate servers. And if this was a large network, if there was say 100 hosts, Nmap would list them all. And if there aren't ports open, it will tell you there's no ports, but it'll still, unless they're blocking pings or something, it should still find them. And you can use Nmap to do a bunch of different deep scans and get version numbers and all sorts of things like that as well to further dig into network. It's very commonly used for fully mapping out a network to work out what to attack next. Okay, where was I going next? Yeah, so that was because we got access to the root account through the sudo. So the other fun thing we can do here is we've got access to this web server, and presumably the web server has access to where the code came from. And so we want to have a look and see if maybe we've got access to Git in here, or GitHub, I should say. So we can ask GitHub nicely, do I have access to you? Yes, we have access to GitHub. Yay. Okay, we can see here, hi Valorant. So Valorant has a SSH key on this server that gives it access to GitHub. Now, we can look at GitHub, and we can look at Valorant's account, and we can see here all the repositories they have that are public. We can also look at, I don't have any organizations at the moment, but you can look at what organizations that they're a member of as well. And you can probably make some guesses as to what hidden repositories they might have access to if you're specifically targeting someone. In this case, I want to grab this one here, so Pwn Validator, copy the link. What is it? Git clone. What is it? It's GitHub, isn't it? No, there's a colon here somewhere. Cool. Okay, so we have access to download the code for this package from this user because we have their key on their server. Now, the cool thing is what we can do here is touch hello BrisPHP. Oops, can't type. Git add hello. Git commit. Hello, git push. And now if I go in here, hello BrisPHP. I have now pushed this file that I created on their server to their repository. So now that I've done that, what's to stop me from introducing some malware into this repository? It's maybe a backdoor, something that dials home and tells me when it's running, when it's live, when it can give me root, when it can give me command access for code execution, right? And then so I add my malware, I push it up like I just did. Then I go git tag, and in here we can see here we've got 135, so I can do 136. I can push the tags. Who knows what Packages is going to do? It's going to pick it up and give it to everyone who wants that package on their website. I can now display malware to anyone who uses that package in the world. Yeah, and no one will notice. Well, people might notice, and there are protections to put in place, but generally no one's going to notice. And this happens all the time. Yeah, so now, I bet this is a small package. I bet probably no one, most of you probably haven't heard of this package before. But what if you found a server run by one of the Laravel developers who have key access to the Laravel repository? You could commit some malware into Laravel itself and then push that up to Laravel's repository and hope no one notices. They probably would. That's a bad example in that sense, but there'll be plenty of other large repositories and large, what are they called? Large programs, things that are commits like that, carefully written, won't be noticed. And then they'll be tagged and they'll be pushed up to Packages, and then someone will be able to download them. And that's kind of the nightmare scenario, and it happens. And yes, if you can sneak the commit past people checking for things and they can push it into production, then you've got your malware running over people's codes. So how do we stop this problem? And the thing is, how did that key get on this server? How did we get access to the Git repository? So if I jump back into Forge, if I can find it, one thing Forge does is when you provision a server, it automatically adds the server's SSH key to the Git account, to your GitHub account, your source code provider, so that whenever it deploys onto the servers, it can automatically access your account. But that means that anyone else on the server can access your account with full read and write capabilities. So what I suggest to do is turn that off. Don't push your key up to the servers, sorry, to GitHub from your servers. And whatever provisioning system you use for your servers, again, don't add your keys to the servers. Instead, when you're doing a deployment, when you're installing a repository, use a deploy key. And so a deploy key is a key that's set up and linked on that repository itself rather than on your account. So that key can only access that repository. And you set the key to read only on GitHub, which means that if someone gets access to the server and they get access to the key, they can pull down your code, but they can't push anything up. They can write whatever malware they want in there, but they can't actually put it on GitHub and no one can get to it. And so that eliminates that problem entirely, because your code on the server essentially is read-only. They can modify it on the server, make local changes, affect people accessing your site, but they're already in there anyway, so it doesn't really matter from that point. But they can't get to anything else you own. They can't get to anything else in your account, anything else that you have access to. So yeah, I'm noticing they're definitely quiet in here. I'm hoping that's a good sign, that everyone's just waiting for me to shut up so we can have some food. But yeah, that's what I was wanting to cover. I hope you enjoyed that and you're not too freaked out. Are there any questions? Cool. Oh, there's one, yes.
How does it work with, how would that type of attack work if you've got your app Dockerized? Because it's running in a virtual machine, which may not actually have the capabilities for all the remote code execution that you're doing, or it might not get you into anything useful.
Yeah, well, yeah, if your app's running in an environment where you can't actually get a shell, then yeah, presumably you wouldn't be able to make that sort of connection. I mean, ultimately, if your app can call services and things that are available to it, then someone doing remote code execution can call those similar services. But yeah, in a container environment that's limited in what it can do, you're definitely limiting the scope. And likewise, if your code is injected into the container rather than pulled in via Git or something, then you've got less risk as well. So yeah, it depends how you deployment. A lot of these, what I'm showing is I was basing it on a server, so we're getting access to the exporting the server. So if your deployments are different, then there are different risks that you have to factor in.
I guess one of the big ones of when you pointed out that you had access to like LDAP and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Why the hell is that on the same network as your web application stuff? But
yeah, well, it's on an internal network. So it's in that scenario, it was on the local the internal network they had set up. But that is the problem where if you do have your web server on the edge of your network, and then it can go into your DMZ, your demilitarized zone. So basically the area of your network that no one should be able to access. If you can get from your web server into there, and then there is a hole in there to get through to the internal network, then of course you can breach. And that happens all the time. There've been big examples where like WordPress plugins get compromised, that have remote code execution, and the attackers can get into, their WordPress server is running on the edge of their network. They can use that to pivot into the network. Yeah. And if you've got things like LDAP and such, if you're running an older version, there's a vulnerability, then again, you can exploit that and dig further. So even if it's internal to your network, you've got to keep it updated. Because if someone gets into there, they can compromise.
I guess there's like a degree of like getting passwords for user accounts and stuff is like all fun and games, but like there's like real serious corporate espionage stuff that happens when like I feel like there was like IBMs or something like that. Some of the big ones were being talked about being pinged recently because they actually got all that way into emails and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It becomes pretty pervasive.
Yeah, definitely happens. Yeah.
It's interesting the comparison as well that like we essentially hash passwords in a great deal because of the greater social good of if our site gets hacked. But like as you point out, you got access to the app secret at some point there, which you can do a lot of damage with. If you're starting JWTs in your application, well now you have the keys to the castle anyway. Yeah,
if someone gets access to your app encrypted key, then you've got a problem. Yeah, and you can decrypt cookies and change those values as well. Yeah. So yeah, it's game over if they get your application key.
Yeah,
very much so.
Hope they haven't made that far.
Yeah, you've got to protect those secrets.
Question from Nathan. What is a reverse shell? What's a reverse shell? How does it work?
Cool. Okay, so a reverse shell is okay. So if you think of it like a data connection, a normal connection where you want to connect to the server, you connect to it this way. So you go to the server and say, "Hi, let me in." A reverse shell is where the server you want to connect to talks to you and says, "I'm going to let you in. Do you want to come in?" And so you're listening for the connection to come in so you can get into the server. So on the app I was trying to break into, I told it, I want to connect to the IP address of my jump box, which is where I was coming from, over port 1234. And on the jump box, I was telling it to listen on port 1234 for an incoming connection. So when the connection came in from the application, when I ran the verify thing, where's it going? Yeah, so when I submitted this form, it tried to connect to my jump box on that port, and that's why it let me in there. So that's the reverse shell. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Is it kind of normal to actually let your firewall allow like a reverse shell?
No, probably not. You shouldn't really.
It probably should.
Yeah.
AWS does it by default.
Yeah,
AWS has a stateful firewall that will allow outgoing stuff, but it won't allow incoming. So I thought that was fairly standard.
Yeah, most things will allow outgoing and block incoming, but it's very common in large companies and to be talked about in just security in general to block outgoing connections. And when the log4j stuff was big and that was first discovered, everyone was talking about blocking all outgoing connections because that worked by getting it to be logged and then sending data out. And so you were pulling information out of the system by getting it to connect out. And so by blocking, throwing up a firewall and just blocking outgoing connections, you're stopping that from going out there. And so, I don't know if any of you work in a company that uses like network proxies. So you connect your computer to the network, but to get to the internet, you've got to go through the proxy and there's a bunch of steps. Well, that's blocking those ports and blocking those connections for that security reason, yeah.
Just one more. So the scenario that you just showed us, right?
Yep.
How possible is it if only the HTTP ports are open? Like if everything else is just closed off?
Yep. So if you did the network scan and you only had the HTTP ports, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you did that and you only had those ports, then you'd investigate those to see if there are applications in there. Maybe there could be an internal application or something. It would depend entirely on what's running on those ports, how exploitable it is.
Back from agency days, dealing with exactly this type of stuff, PHP shells were all the rage, where if you can remotely execute code on a server, you can dump a PHP file on the server, which you can access through Apache, and then that runs as the user that Apache is running and you can have it do whatever you want on the server.
Yeah.
You bring data
Yes.
through the HTTP.
And then what we had was, there was a issue with Joomla because it was using a flash file uploader. So it would accept files. Yep, and people would upload a PHP script or a PHP shell onto a Joomla site. And then because of another quirk of Joomla, where it very helpfully made everything 777 world writable, that script could then spread to every other site on the server and run as those users too.
Yeah. Yeah, you always want to validate your uploads.
Joomla's terrible, never use it.
You remember one thing from this talk. Cool. I just quickly want to mention, I write Laravel Security in Depth, which is a weekly newsletter thing about Laravel security. If you do Laravel, and there's a discount code there if you want to get a cheap subscription as well.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm just.
By the way,
I'm not really clear if you want to be like. Sure.
No, I don't care.
And there's a quick.
I don't.
Oh, yeah.
What was that? Line for. Oh, it's cool. Awesome.
So essentially, we've got 4 folks from different companies. They're going to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about their process at a high level, various pieces of information, and then we'll start digging into questions. So we'll go in the order of however it's been prepared in the PowerPoint slide, which is Greg to start first.
Nope. Right. Oh, yeah, cool. Hi, I'm Greg. I'm the head of software engineering at IC Plant. And digital web deployment at IC Plant. So that's me. We do emoji. Show up in all the presentations. We're a relatively small team. There's currently 9 of us in the team. We manage about 30 services, and this is a deployment process, which is basically you write some code, you code review, you merge your code, robots, then production. So absolutely everything that we do is deployed. We work in very, very small slices, and what we aim to do is to make it safe to always be deployed. I think our record is north of 60 deployments in a single day. That was 20 to 30 is probably more like normal. Yeah, it's a fairly extreme approach to doing this. There are slightly less extreme versions of it. Continuous delivery is one that a lot of people have heard of, which is everything that we do right up to the deployment bit. But instead of deploying, you build something like a Docker image and stick it somewhere, and then let a person actually put it in production. We're sort of lucky enough that we have enough control in our test fleet to allow us to push everything in production. And we're also not a super highly regulated industry, so we're not worried about looking at people's salaries or high finance or anything like that. So we can kind of get away with it. Super quickly, a lot of these sort of topics get sort of conflated. So continuous integration versus continuous delivery versus continuous deployment. Continuous integration is a thing you can't do without if you want to do any of these things. And that's effectively multiple times per day, code is being integrated into master, and it's being tested and proven that it is actually good to go live. Continuous delivery is what I was talking about. You run it through a pipeline, does end-to-end tests, strings up your entire environment, all of the bells and whistles, and then builds some kind of deployable artifact and sticks it in an artifact repository where a human being can actually decide whether it's going to go. And then continuous deployment is you take humans out of the equation, and the business decision to deploy code becomes a automated computer decision, and we actually physically can't stop a deployment from going once we merge. If the test passes, it's going into production. At 2 minutes to 5 on a Friday before you go and leave for 3 months, it's going into production, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The cool thing is when you're doing this, because the changes are so incredibly small, if you screw it up and you've got decent observability, you're a git revert, git push away from being back in the state that you're in before. So yeah, I'm sure everyone will like to press me on the actual specifics in a bit, but that's me.
Find out who's next. Like going to the next slide.
Oh, there you are. Ooh, fancy. So I've been been freelancing / running my own consulting company for the last 11 or 12 years, and I worked in an agency before that. So if you haven't worked in an agency, I think there might be a couple of you. No, most people seem to get into PHP through agency life and then move into bigger, better things later. I never did move into bigger, better things. So there's a few different ways I deal with.
Guys, that's not a joke. You're not supposed to laugh, actually.
Yeah, it's genuinely not a joke. I do have this is a live system from a client that I have right now. All they could provision me with FTP access because they're not particularly technically minded, and the people who own their servers refuse to talk to me. So that's it. Massive pain in the ass, can't use the CLI. I can't verify that the files on there haven't changed through Git because there is no Git on the server. I can't use Composer on the server. I can't use any of those things. Rollbacks are, they basically take as long as each individual file FTPing up, and everything is broken in a weird state the whole time. And occasionally the remote server will decide, no, you've opened too many FTP connections, I'm blocking you for a day. Yeah, it's a real pain. Don't do this ever, please try not to. But it's still also how a lot of people learned how to develop and deploy sites. Thanks WordPress and Joomla and Drupal and all of the web hosts that
Publish on save. That's like say publish straight to FTP.
Yeah, there's so many. So yeah, if you have any asset builds or anything, they all have to be done locally and pushed up. Massive pain. The next level up is your cheap cPanel shared hosting. Sometimes, if you're real lucky, you can get some SSH access. You might be able to use Composer. A lot of the standard tools you can't get access to because of security. So this is, once again, a production client server. They are paying for business hosting, and you can't use any functions that have exec in them, which means half of Composer can't actually do its stuff. You can't use Laravel Tinker, you can't use all of these things because for security, PHP can't run exec, despite the fact that you can run SSH in and do whatever. It's basically been incredibly defensive, and it ruins a whole bunch of my life. Also can't use NPM, so I can't build assets there. So I still have to build assets locally, commit them to Git, and then push compiled assets to Git to the server through Git. It's still terrible, and cPanel I also hate with a red hot passion. Next step up, you get a client has their own VPS. That's a lot better. You can actually do things on it. You can build your assets on it, so you can get your NPM. You can do all the bits and pieces. It's still probably doing everything, so the database is still running on the site. So you might, trash everything if the database runs awry, or if someone gets in, they completely ruin your life and your client's life, and there's no backups because what are backups for? It's pretty easy to accidentally brick the server, and it's pretty easy to forget an uncommon step in a deployment. So if you're not often doing migrations and then you release a bit of code, it's sometimes easy to forget to run the migration script, and then everything breaks and you've already left for the day. And it can be difficult to be certain about what the environment's doing because someone else might control it. Next step up from there, semi-automated deployments where you get a build server involved, and or not a build server, so you get some basic bash scripts involved, and you write a nice little bash script which does all the things that you don't want to forget. It's nice, it's a bit more documented. Rollback is still a bit difficult. It's a bit more predictable, and it can be automated, so you can have a CI/CD server call the script, or SSH into a machine and call the script. And there is still some issues if you need to change end files and or environment and you forget before you do a deploy. And finally, CI/CD builds are the gold standard for clients where I can get to them, build the assets, bundle them off the server, deploy packages to various production systems. So that way you don't need NPM sitting on your production server, which is probably a good thing. You probably don't even need half the composer stuff on there. You can start bundling just the bits that you need and put that there. And you can also deploy a branch rather than, or deploy specific branches easier because you can reliably bundle up the branches and just push them to deployment. And that's
Wow,
onwards.
that brings back memories. That's where I started my career, dealing with everybody else's infrastructure. And it's a wild world, isn't it? Holes. All right, so I'm one of the directors. I head up business infrastructure at Creditsets, which means if we have an outage, I get in trouble effectively. So this is just a really quick snapshot. I had a really hard time doing this. I must have written about 20 slides because I'm so passionate about CI/CD. We live and breathe it here because it's the hub and spoke, like it's the hub on spoke, it's the hub to the wheel that that makes so much of our business click together. And it's fundamental and it's very, very difficult. And the scary part is it changes as your business changes tremendously. So we got 5 dev teams. I mean, we're not a big company either. We are building everything we build, though. We punch way above our weight. We build for scale everywhere. So we've got an ops team of 3 at the moment, which is bugger all. But we have 5 dev teams, about 30 developers. We have about 400 repositories, and we've been around for long enough to have a mix of architectures. We don't just have serverless. We don't just have frameworks. We got like we rode a wave of PHP's great, no Node's great, no React's great. Like everyone says something's great as they come in the door, and we do a project or a POC, and that thing's supposed to die and go away, but it doesn't. It stays, and you need to support it. And all of a sudden, you're one of those groups you used to kind of go, how did they get into that mess? But you've got to embrace the mess. You've got to go, hey, this is what we've got, and now we need to make sure that not the only person that can deploy it isn't Jimmy who wrote it. And that's really key to how CI/CD is making a big difference, particularly for us. So we have 2 on top of that, 2 formally supported IAC language, Ansible and Terraform, but we also play in the Go tool and what else. Environments, we got 4 very distinct separate environments, each with their own purpose. Dev, got your laptop, that's great, you work there. We got system integration, then we push into user acceptance testing, and then production. I'll take you guys through really briefly. I know I've only got a short time, and this is such a passionate topic. I'm struggling, so I'm going to just do the best I can. On top of that, we didn't just stick with cloud. We're actually hybrid. So we've got 2. We're in 2 of the tier 4 highest rated data centers in the Southern Hemisphere. We've got stacks of our own servers running on our own virtualization stacks in there through transit gateways to AWS, and we run and offload a lot of our heavy workload intensive work onto those. And our goal is all of our data centers are identical, kind of like a FedEx box, whether it's AWS or our DCs. And we just put the parcel where it's going to work best. We just shuffle it around. So our data centers have finite resources, and anytime our loads come in that exceed that, then they scale up in AWS to improve. So as you said, observability is key. So monitoring every single page load time is critical for that. 2 years ago, we got ISO 27001 certified because as a core, what we do is we collect millions and millions and millions of people's access to their bank statements and their banking data. So at any time, at any month, we might have 400,000 or 500,000 people who give us access to their banking data. We pull down the last 12 months of transaction history. So we have PII data out the wazoo. And it's something where we're very, very passionate about. Security is the key first thing that comes into any conversation really across the board. And you see it when our new employees start and they spend like 5 hours going through our security training and 2-factor for everything. And it's really, really great because once it's in place, it's pretty seamless because it all works as a side effect. So And the one difference probably is we moved a few years ago to KX, Kubernetes being the package that enables us to wrap everything up and move it from place to place without there being really an issue about where it's running. CI/CD, our goals, this was really key for the business. Sustainable software development. As you grow your own business, the worst thing that can ever happen is Jimmy leaves, and Jimmy's the only guy that knows how it works. Jimmy has his own standards. Jimmy's the only guy that can deploy. Jimmy Costa Mozza, he built this thing you're all passionate about, and now Jimmy's the only guy that can fix it when it breaks. So sustainable software development is just critical, and CI/CD ties all that in. It must support our standards, and it must provide transparent company-wide reporting. So we're actually in the last phase of one of our CI/CD journeys at the moment. Every single job that runs in CI/CD outputs consistent metrics, no matter what language you're using. And those metrics get pumped out to a New Relic where everyone in the company can see at an app, project, or team level your unit test coverage, your linting compliance, your vulnerabilities for your CVE scans, et cetera, et cetera. So, but from a dev's point of view or an ops member's point of view, it's got to be easy, really easy and repeatable. You shouldn't need to be an ops to be able to use CI/CD. So reduce the number of systems I need to use, please, and make it easy. Unblock product teams so they can deploy on their schedule. And we've got Diego here tonight. He's one of our devs. He's on this journey with us as we're migrating everyone to our newest version of CI/CD, and we shoot for these goals. It needs to be fast, clear, and actionable feedback. So if it breaks, what went wrong? Can I see it? And we need to be able to manually override a failure. Love what you were saying before, but sometimes the inverse happens where an alert will go off and we'll go, geez, the CVE scan failed, and we have a hard rule, no critical CVEs, and we look at it and we go, oh, that's actually not something that's even possible based on our infrastructure. So let's force a deploy. And then we put that as a fix that has to happen, but it shouldn't block it, for instance. So there needs to be able to put a human in front of Skynet because sometimes we need to make better decisions. Last two slides really quick. We have really rigorous environment and CI/CD activities. So I'm not going to go through all these, but our dev is just the app ecosystem. We have every push in of code that triggers a whole bunch of tests that run. In SIT, this is really where the heavyweight starts. Really, the main thing that happens here is all the end-to-end tests also run, vulnerabilities tests run. The production level Docker images get built and they get tested and checked for any sort of vulnerabilities that might have been injected. And if all of that passes, then we move on to UAT. And UAT is just the full ecosystem that's out, pre-prod. And it's where effectively everything is exactly like prod, except for what you just pushed into it. And then we run load testing in addition to end-to-end tests in an actual prod environment. So, and last but not least, we just deploy. We also really believe in when you deploy your code, your docs also get built and deployed. So your API docs, everything like that. So that way there's a matching set of source of truth docs that mirror up with all of the code that changes. So you know, if a new API endpoint's created, whatever. So it's a holistic vision of CI/CD, not just like coding, deploying. And lastly, really quick, what do we use? Look, you could use other tools. We found these to be quite agnostic and quite good. We got on the Atlassian train early, so we're in Bitbucket. We kind of wish we were in GitLab or GitHub, but you know, that's where we are, and it works for us. And so any GitOps trigger, whether it be we do two. There's either a PR merge or a branch will trigger one of our release processes. Then we do build and test. That all happens in Circle CI. Any artifacts we create push up to Nexus, and all of our tests run in Docker containers. Then if it doesn't pass, hey, go back to start and don't collect $200. If it does fail, but we go, hang on, we really need to be able to deploy that. Then we have Slack. It sends us messages, and we can manually override depending on who the allowed people are. And it's really easy then, because only the people who are allowed to override it get the message. They log into Circle CI, click a button, and it overrides. That's very rare, but you need to have it, because the last thing you want is to not be able to deploy when something goes sideways, and you know you need to. And then but if it all passes, yes, there is an auto deploy capability, and that's Circle CI. Pull from Nexus and use our good mate Kubernetes to push it out. Underpinning all of that is real-time reporting. So every single job has got very, very clear metrics that are consistent, no matter if you're using Python, Node, React, whatever. If you run unit tests, we coalesce all of the different packages that you could be running unit tests to get the same set of metrics, and they all pump out. So across the board, we get to see one holistic view of the company, and then we can roll that up, as I said, between product, project, app, project, or team. So yeah, and we back everything up to S3, so that if we want to pull it out in New Relic and put in Grafana or something later, we've always got our stuff there too. So that's us kind of in a nutshell. Sorry, I went longer than I should.
Next.
Someone chose it on stands.
So I'm Neil from Foundry. Been at Foundry just under 8 years now this year, and I am a tech lead there. My main focus is doing a lot of scalings and security and infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. I still dabble with tools now and then. So we've had a bit of a evolution in our CI. So we first started off with SFTP. Great when you're one person, not so great when you overwrite someone else's changes, as like two or more devs. So we also ran on a single VPS, which kept going down, which wasn't very helpful. I mean, you pay very cheap, that's not really going to be reliable. And so then when I joined dealing with that, I got sick of it. We started then looking at alternative solutions, migrated our service to AWS, which was way more reliable. And we also used a service called, or was called, Deploybot. It was a very basic tool, clone the repo, run a couple of commands, and then push it out through rsync. Unfortunately, obviously, the more developers we had, the more pushes we had, the slower it started going. And then we realized, because we're on the Atlassian train as well, Bitbucket Pipelines was released not too long ago. Not too long ago, from 2016. So we decided to use that. It was great. We started early with it, and we didn't have much problems until more and more people started using it. And then we started noticing a lot of slowdowns as a team group as well. We're just sitting there twiddling our thumbs. Why isn't this building? Why is this taking so long? And it was just due to some limitations of the infrastructure capacity, resource capacity, basically. So then we started to have a look at something more self-hosted. We landed on BuildKite. With BuildKite, we also transitioned from rsync SSH to a proper process, because in AWS, using code deploy made life so much easier for everyone. And also with BuildKite, the advantage of that is because it's not hosting it, we decide what resources to put in. So we've got a whole bunch of different agents running. We have a small agent for running quick code sniff, for doing some minor things, and then integration testing. We've got some bigger instances, need a bit more grunt, utilizing Docker Compose, all that sort of stuff. And then in 2020, we started using Terraform a lot, doing a lot of microservices using Fargate on ECS Fargate on AWS. A lot of time we'll be doing a lot of manual provisioning and things like that. So then we've also automated that in our pipeline. So we just push up the services we need, and then it just basically reads our template, you could say, and push out an internal service, external service, a Node app, whatever. So our deployment cycle, we release a lot as well, mainly because of, obviously, it's a smaller business. We want to keep improving our products. We have a lot of customer-driven feedback as well. So a lot of the time, customers will come to us and say, hey, can we have this sort of functionality or somewhat similar to it? And we're constantly developing and pushing out. So what we do is we've got several different environments. Because we're always changing stuff, we need enough environments to do enough use acceptance testing, things like that, and also beta releases. So if we want customers on, so if they are like an early adopter of a feature, we have staging environments that we set up, and they can move in between. So once you're in staging, you can do run as a production environment in that staging environment, and once that feature is generally available, we then move it back over. We have a platform orchestrator which handles all this for us, so we're not doing it manually. So if you move a customer across one feature to another, it's a simple process. Anyone can really do it, obviously if you're authorized to do it. And that also determines where the customers run. So in a pipeline, we have requests going, hey, you know, XYZ customers run on master. Okay, I'm going to give you this response. This is the list. And then if we push out to our staging environment or a testing environment, that will tell that step that, hey, you know, customers from New South Wales or Queensland, whatever, these set of customers run this environment. So we have very dynamic pipelines as well. So certain like production will always run tests for us in case when you get hot about things like that, to make sure nothing's broken. Feature branches will always run tests. They run the entire suite, code sniff, the whole deal. If you're pushing out to a testing environment, the dependency for that to actually run the test with the feature branch, once your branch is passed, we then allow you to push it into a testing environment. QA goes through acceptance criteria, all that sort of stuff. So what actually happens within the pipeline? So so as I mentioned before, we go on BLS en route. Bitbucket pushes out to BuildKite. The advantage of BuildKite as well, I'm sure with a lot of other CI tools, is you can pass your step configuration dynamically through the pipeline code, code repository. So if we want to do some tests on a brand new feature, we just update the CI YAML file config, and we don't affect anyone. It just isolates to that branch that we're testing on. Once that goes through, we build our assets. We have Docker containers and archives, zip archives that are pushed through S3, and we use code deploy and ECS 5.8, or depending on the services that we use. And then once it goes out, it's a graceful deployment. So if you're trying to do something on the platform, you're sending requests out, you don't get it cut off. So blue-green deployment is basically, if you haven't heard of it or unaware of what it is, basically what it means is you push out a new set of servers, they finish a deployment, and then it starts draining old connections in the old servers, and then starts accepting traffic on the new ones. So you don't experience any downtime. And then we have happy customers for that. So what we run in the pipeline, being a very Laravel heavy application, PHP unit, Cypress, Jest tests, and we utilize EC2 for more heavy, intense applications. The smaller microservices, as mentioned before, we use Fargate. And then with what we actually have running on those services, we actually split out so that if something dies, it doesn't affect a queue or it's a web server or something. So if we need to kill a web server for some reason, something went wrong with the server, we can kill it. It doesn't matter. Nothing's on that server. So all our storage databases are all remote. Obviously, if you're on a VPS, that becomes a bit of a problem. That's another reason why we also need AWS to have a bit more control over that. And then with Fargate, same sort of stack. The only difference is we don't run a scheduler for that. So when in the Laravel, you've got the scheduler built in. We actually utilize scheduled tasks, which is a lot more simpler cheaper as well, because you don't have a constant server running to execute your scheduled tasks. And pipeline build times vary depending on what you run. Testing environments run a bit more, a bit less than what you run on a production pipeline. So it's quicker to get stuff tested out and push through UAT, and then we do either a big release or we gradually release bits by bit. And we release all week and on Friday. So that's thank you. Questions?
All right, so lots of questions for everyone. Probably, the one to sort of understand is like general timeframes from like, I've got a hot fix for a feature I released yesterday, had a bug in it, I didn't realize, and I just found I need to fix. How long does it take everyone to get through that process from like, I've raised a PR through to like, it's actually in production?
So for us, it's, we track a mean time to close defect metric in the team, the North Stars that the team has. We sort of target 3 hours from discovery to deployment. So that's average, obviously. Running the bugs, it'll take you 3 days to to fix, but on average, we're running about somewhere between 3 to 4 hours. That's from when it's raised by a user or via some system that's observing the state, like a bug snag kind of situation, or some sort of spike in traffic or load, or duration, raising a ticket to someone say, hey, something's wrong, can you go and look at it? So yeah, about 3 hours for us. I think where our we focus very highly on having a very, very fast deployment pipeline. That's critical to be able to get stuff out quickly. The part I didn't mention is that we're different to everyone here. I think that we're completely serverless. So we deploy out using variable vapor. So we don't have any of this containerization orchestration to worry about. That's kind of taken care of for us. Deployment pipelines, depending on the application, that's running somewhere between 3 minutes for the really fast ones and 16 minutes for the slow ones.
Does Vapor control your database assets as well, or does it just control your web, like?
So we use Vapor to manage our database infrastructure. But it's as of about a week ago, it's just Aurora serverless too. So it's just all the AWS toys. You don't necessarily have to do that if you don't. Where Vapor doesn't allow us the control, we do things with a variety of other services that aren't in the Laravel ecosystem. We have a series of Terraform scripts that also run through the same pipeline, so engineers can sort of have a little Terraform folder in most repositories that has the, and also run these Terraform scripts as part of the deployment, and it's also orchestrated and managed by the pipeline solution.
I think I was on first. Honestly, I think it sounds a bit odd, but I don't remember the last time we did a hotfix. We have the mechanism for it, and they happen. They absolutely happen. But they're the rare exception. There has to be something drastic going on in production for us to not take the normal branching method and flow through. And that's probably, like you saw, it's how many pre-production checks we do. So there's a lot of tests before things get out to sort of limit that. If we have to, I think pushing through would be a couple of hours. Like we could expedite it quicker if it was depending on what it was. But when something goes wrong that's like at hotfix level, there's usually an incident team that jumps in, and so everybody jumps on a meet. We go through a whole thing of trying to sort it out. The very first step of that's mitigation before we worry about remediating long term, and that's where a hotfix would be applicable. And we can force skip checks, and we can do those manual overrides, as I mentioned. But yeah, it wouldn't be like minutes. It would be 1 to 2 hours sort of thing. I would say that's time to diagnose, identify, fix, push, and then just punch things straight through. We can skip environments if we really need to, and that happens in an incident and only in an incident. But then every single incident we have has very rigorous post-incident postmortems where we make sure that those things can never happen again. And so we used to have a lot of outages many years ago, and we had these issues coming up, and that's when we put in our first CI/CD pipeline, which was horribly manual, and everybody hated it because all of a sudden things slowed to a halt, right? But our uptime went from like not so great to through the roof, and we have practically 100% apart from when Cloudflare decides to go out.
That's happened recently.
No.
Short of that, like it's so rock solid, but it happens through lots of falling on your face and then learning from it and walking a little bit better the next time. But
Yeah, so 1 to 2 hours, I guess, would be probably the answer it bluntly. Yeah.
How frequent are your releases that go along with that? Like, I'd imagine like regulated environments a little bit.
Yeah, we look, we encourage this like smaller releases, but teams tend to go on from very ad hoc. I'm ready now for my feature, and just push it to actually a structured. We know that we want to release, Tuesday and Thursday. Guys, we don't do a Friday generally ever, because it's so rigorous, and we have a really hefty alerting system. Like everything that's out there has got monitoring and alerting, no matter what new feature it is, and there's runbooks associated with it. So if something goes wrong, whoever the team is that controls that, they've got 24/7 call alerting, kind of like pager duty that gets you up 24/7. So we're really protective of from a cultural perspective. So yeah, look, I think honestly, it's team by team. Some teams release probably a couple or 3 times a week. I know it doesn't sound hugely high velocity, but our releases are into SIT. You see them pump through our rollout channel in Slack every time there's a release, dozens of times a day because they're doing it. But then once they get everything right and all the testing's fine, it's just then they push it out. So I think there's a lot of stuff happens in pre-production, very, very continuous. But actually going to prod, I'd say we're probably slower than most, but it's not, it hasn't really affected us to any sort of issue yet. We'd love to have high velocity as always, though.
Yeah, for sure.
So with us, it varies a little bit. If it's something that's drastic, like seriously affecting, like service gone down or something, we've got the ability to roll back our deployment. Data migrations are a little bit more difficult. So that one, we just like, okay, we get the team involved, like, hey, what happened? Let's go and investigate code, see what's going wrong. We have Slack error channels, so basically everything, even our testing environments. So if we know there's something wrong with the testing, we go and dig into find something in there or not. And then if it really is like serious, the senior team gets involved and we start investigating, going through sort of tech leads and all that. And then usually the time frame that we try and fix it is with, sometimes it can take a couple of hours, sometimes a few minutes. Sometimes a small fix, but we try and get it basically as soon as possible before a customer comes and sends a ticket through, gets escalated, and all that. So the error reporting, we are always kind of monitoring. If there's something has gone wrong, we'll know. Yeah, so if we have the ability to push out hotfixes, skip tests. Obviously, tests do take a long time, but if it's something that is a test-related issue, obviously we have to go and figure out why that test passed, but production is failing for it. And then, if need be, we will actually revert back and go from there.
Anywhere from 5 minutes to 8 years. Depends on the system, whether the client gives a shit and is willing to spend money on it, how fast FTP is. No, there's no real set timeline. It really does depend on the project. I've been quite recently sitting in an airport doing stuff on my phone with an SSH client to fix something that went down. Other times I tell the client something went down and they went, we're not using it, it's fine. We'll ping you when it's good, when we need it. Obviously they'll ping me with it being a sudden emergency that it needs to be working last week, but that's how the type of work is.
Are you all, do you tend to use a lot of like feature flags, feature toggles for a lot of your work? Is that like across the board generally? It's a question for everyone. Is that something that you guys use as part of the particularly you, Greg, as an example, like deploying out 60 times a day sort of thing?
So the feature flags for us are how we get around what a lot of people use staging environments or UAT environments for. So most large initiatives are built behind feature flags, and that's the secret for being able to deploy something quickly, right? Is it, how do I divide this piece of work up so I can put it in production safely and not necessarily let users see it because it's completely broken, doesn't work. We want it out there, so we build behind feature flags all the time. And feature flags give you a bunch of other advantages too, right? Where if something does go wrong, it's another string in your bow. Yeah, you could roll it back. Yeah, you could roll forward. Or you just turn the damn thing off. Sorry, feature flags. You do other cool things with it. I mean, we're talking about blue-green deployments. We can do blue-green deployments or canary rollouts or any combination of blue, green, and canary at a feature level, right? So we can have a new feature going live and start feeding load into that new feature and monitoring to see whether or not that new feature is taxing the database in ways that we're expecting, production load. In my experience, no amount of actual synthetic load testing will prepare your software for production load because users are weird and they do strange things and you code in ways that you weren't expecting them to. So we can canary release things and monitor what the impact of rolling that feature out might be. At the same time, we can be running half of our audience on this feature and another audience, half the audience on this other feature and be measuring using A/B testing as to which one's going to do blue buttons convert better than green buttons. And we can sort of do in a big sort of melting pot. And that's how we can get away with having one environment. people think it's weird when I say we literally just have a production. There is only one place where the code runs, aside from local dev, of course, which is different kettle of fish where weird stuff happens, but there's only production, right? We do have staging environments that form part of the build pipeline, but they're there for the robots, right? So if we're doing a migration, for instance, we'll deploy to a staging environment, next migration against the staging environment, then verify that the migration is not going to break a copy of the production database. So to be more sure that that migration is going to work when it actually hits a real server. But humans typically don't get sort of involved in that.
So you don't have any humans like on a staging environment testing QA feature?
No, we would do that in production. We would sort of say, hey, new feature's about to go live. Humans in the beta test group, go and test that. Or users who have opted into that feature, go and have a play around with it. You've all seen this kind of stuff if you're using your Atlassian suite. You occasionally get, hey, we've turned on AWS do this all the time as well. Hey, we've turned this new dashboard on for you. You're in a feature flagging. Well,
and usually the second thing is, here's how to turn it off.
Exactly. You have been opted into a giant experiment whenever you hit one of those things. They're monitoring what you're doing and trying to see whether or not you're, so whatever metrics they have to happen. It is a relatively extreme way of working. It's certainly not for everybody, but the advantage that it affords you in terms of being able to mix and match what users are actually seeing, be able to monitor those things independently. This is where the observability piece is just so crucial. And make decisions based on actual real user behavior pretty well in real time. And yeah, have the ability to go, whoops, that feature has done some weird things to my database. I'm just going to quietly switch that off and go and figure it out. Maybe do a roll forward instead of a rollback, which is always sort of preferable from a metrics point of view. Things my change failure rate metrics stays really low.
Do you have like test data in production then that we test these features with, or is it all production data? Because something really bad happens.
It's mostly production data. So, if we're rolling out a new feature, we may reserve sort of options to say, well, hey, while we're beta testing out these tables or this database or whatever that's running this, when we actually do go completely live, we're going to drop all those tables and start again, because it's kind of just for experimental purposes. We'd probably do that if a lot of internal users were testing a feature behind a flag.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're actually trying to get feedback from actual real users using our software. We're going to make a choice between that feature or that feature. The data is going to be valid in either case. There's a whole pile of complexity that comes into that around database design for like two sort of very small features that are actually implemented in incredibly different ways. How do you actually build a data model that can support one of those choices being right or Mongo? This is what. Yeah, so I mean, it's I definitely don't recommend the way you look for everyone. But if you do, if you're in an environment where you can get away with it, and not everyone can. I think more people can than realize. Like a lot of people are sort of like, oh, it's impossible. That's really irresponsible or whatever. You're not dealing with like hypercritical things where lots of things can go horribly wrong very quickly. So probably would not recommend. But if you're building like the kinds of software that I think most people are building, I think you can afford to sort of lean in. There are definitely strategies that allow you to not only have your cake and eat it, but have a better bit of cake. Like you can do some stuff that you simply can't do with environments when you use feature flags. So to organize all that.
It's interesting because you're moving your deployment to configuration effectively. We explored it a while back, and it does have good, incredible benefits. It goes so quick. Also, unfortunately, sometimes further down the chain, there's more power for people to deploy into production. So any change in production, we consider obviously like a deployment. It's something that's changing how production's working, and if that's just now a DB dev can flick a switch in the DB and all of a sudden all the stuff changes, then whoever's responsible for infrastructure staying up, all of a sudden has got zero control over that, and maybe a control group or something. But effectively, it's the sort of thing where do we do it just to answer everyone? Sometimes, absolutely, but it's on like a deploy by deploy basis, and particularly for the really large things. Sometimes we want to get the code out there, and we want to be testing other elements, and a lot of pieces have to be in place. So there might be 5 apps that chain, and the deployment time to get them all out is just not going to be synchronized properly. So you get them all out there, and then you're able to use something like configuration to flip a feature flag, and they'll all in sync then work because is laid
It
out.
doesn't really complicate the test, like, just to be completely clear. If you're gonna do this, if you're gonna effectively drive define out of configuration, and you're gonna do it properly, you have to run tests against every conceivable combination of configured feature flags.
Someone might flick together, yeah.
Yeah, we control who can flick the flags on and off, so we don't have a situation where somebody can go and destroy someone in like ops weekend by flicking a certain combination of things on. But you have to really think, and yeah, they're really easy to. I've done a talk on feature flagging previously. One of the bits of advice I always give people with feature flags is that when you're done with them, get the hell rid of them as soon as possible, because they're really easy to create. They afford you all of this leverage, and they're technical debt the second you create them. So if you can imagine a piece of code, and have the situation where we've had like 90 flags on it, people who are around those. We've had 90 flags on it, and God knows what state they're in. And every single one of those is somewhere in the code. If this flag evaluates as true, then execute this bit of code. Otherwise, if this flag evaluates as true, execute this bit of code. And it's a nightmare. So
Get that fun report, like, client had this, like, yeah, but what was the combination of these?
yeah, exactly. So you do need, there is a discipline that goes with it. It was a great power back responsibility kind of thing. It does afford you an awful lot of leverage, and it allows you to do some really, really cool things. But when you're done with them, just in the bin, just get rid of them as soon as you can.
That was one of the reasons we actually sort of steered away from them unless we really needed them, was because the added overhead to do cleanup and the code base just becoming a splintered set of things. They're absolutely brilliant, but as I say, yeah, they can be super dangerous, and it's just safer not to. But for the level that we like where we play, it's just safer not to, because when something goes wrong, we need to be able to say our repo is a source of truth, not our repo plus what the state is. And,
I'd imagine with like multiple services as well, you end up getting up to a flag that kind of like leaks across service boundaries.
Oh, don't do that.
And
Please
then,
don't.
as in like, you would reach to that sort of thing, and then
and a feature flag's only like really backward compatible up to its point in time. The next feature flag, it's not considering what that one might be doing. So, you would hope the code has made this one backward compatible, but it hasn't considered what might come next. And yeah, I think it looks great use to use when it's suitable, but that's going to be different for every company.
do you guys use a lot of that, can't you?
A bit. Yeah, so being payroll software, we do service a lot of different industries: hospitality, labor, overhire businesses, blue collar, white collar, everything. So we do have a lot of configuration options in the platform. It gets to a point where if it's something really major, that's when we use our staging environments. So if we have a really big feature going out and it's like, okay, we push the code and we know this is not going to work with the old system or the old version of the system, then we transition people over to a staging environment. And even like if it's a minor feature, then and if it does work with everything in its current state, then yes, the feature flag does work. Like as an example, if you're using like a clock in out system, you can opt in to use that. You can opt in for employees to use their phone for it, or use it through their employee app. That's an option you can choose to do, and it's available. It doesn't affect anyone. That's an option you can turn on. So with, for example, with a single touch payroll, right? So because single touch payroll is being overhauled for the new year, it was delayed, but it's coming to effect. That's a whole different story. That's basically your core system inside your payroll software, which needs to then work. It's not built in a way where it's backwards compatible with the SPP1. So for that sort of thing, yes, we start migrating people over from the current version over to the new version through a staging environment, and it's done gradually. So we have a few people running on a staging environment with new features for that specific change. And then once it's all finalized, everything's done, then everyone just switches over and we move those. That becomes your master. Everyone moves back to your production state.
I'm fascinated how you can move customers between a production and staging. I suspect it's to do with the way you handle custom databases.
Database per customer, Brad.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat multi-talented, like individual databases.
Single and multi-tenant.
Yeah, really interested then because I think CI/CD for absolutely database CI/CD. That's a freaking nightmare. Like, that's a whole other world of fun. Maybe I'll ask a question.
Go, do it.
Like, what's the what sort of database and because Mongo count?
So yeah, so as James, sorry. Jimmy, as he said before, we do have individual database per customer. This is a remnant of before I came on. It was always set up as a separate database. And with that, it allows us to transition people between it. So we have customers, let's say we've got individual states, Queensland, right? So customers in New South Wales may have some sort of legislation or something come into effect first over there and then comes to Queensland after. So what we do is then we'd be able to move that subset of customers over without affecting anyone else. So our platform orchestrator that we have, or management system that we have, actually helps us do that quite a bit. So that system actually connects to every environment that we have. Our testing environments, you can control overrunning communications, so if you need to test something the communications, that gives you that control. And if you want to provision a new environment, so we get a new customer on board, we don't go in and start doing stuff we used to in the past, a few years ago. But now we just go to that management system and we just go, okay, new customer name, this is their billing details, this is X, Y, Z, and they're going to run as a production system. And then that goes out. We don't do any deployments, nothing like that. The actual service communicates to all the servers running and says, hey, this environment's now active, pull down in config required and allow access and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that really helps in having people running in two separate environments that are still prod, but like a beta sort of environment sort of thing. Yeah.
How the hell does migrations fit into that picture though?
So yeah, so the migrations side of things, when we deploy out or we provision an environment, it's like a base level database, like a blank database, which has no data, it's just purely schema, and maybe things like what do you call like payroll tax rates and like the general data you'd have in a payroll system. And then the customer gets and puts everything in. So the database itself, when it's provisioned, it actually creates based on their environment name, essentially. So it's a prefix for the environment name, and you'll have like an invoice database. You'll have which holds payroll and everything like that, and all these different subsets of systems there. And we just run the migration, standard level migration, nothing too weird about that. But we have individual environment files. So they're all isolated database. So if one database has a credential of XYZ, it can't access the other database. The credentials are all different. And it's all randomly generated, provision, all that sort of stuff.
So when you come to deploying a new change, changes one of the database schemas in some way, add the column, whatever, that now has to run across a lot of different databases.
Yes.
How does that happen? Who does that?
When it deploys the queue service, there's code that essentially looks at all the customer files and gives out the job to run the migrations. And after the queue service is finished deploying and all the migrations have run, we deploy out to web. And we start to change the interface.
Yeah, so your migrations run after like you deploy the migration thing, deploy the new code or something. So your migrations have to be backwards.
It can be a bit stressful.
Yeah.
Pretty just.
Yeah, if it's a really big major feature, and if even a queue job relies on that schema change, we release a migration first, so it's prepped.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would hit our queued environment because the amount of environments we have. If you start running everything in line, you're going to wait for that migration to finish everywhere. So we actually have queue. We utilize a queue system and Laravel to say, hey, run the migration. And then once that's out, we know everything's prepped, columns there, schemas there, or table, whatever. And then we push out the actual feature. If it's something like small enough where it's not even using anything on the queue system, but it's purely a web access level, yeah, because once queues are done, the web's going to start accepting traffic well after. So, yeah.
How do you cope with a migration to a single instance where, for whatever reason, it fails on a single database? Does sometimes happen. MySQL has a freak out halfway through and leaves it in a broken state.
Yep.
How do you
So-
roll back?
So with that one, rollbacks, yeah. We have what, maybe a handful of migrations that roll back. We do listen, like when we do deploy, it tells in the CI pipeline, we've got individual steps. So it knows, we can tell that it's at the queue level, and then it'll start going into the web. If that queue level fails, we'll either see that one entire step fail. If it's on the active server level, we'll see if the errors coming through. We do have the ability to run it manually as well. Using session manager, like LNG session manager on there, you can actually connect to the box, but it's very restricted. So it's only really senior people, the tech infrastructure people, that sort of stuff. Myself, James, and other people. If we really need to manually intervene, we will. Or we can actually retry that deployment again. If we know that it is working, but for some reason it just freaked out, too many connection or whatever it was, we can trigger that again and have it run. Yeah.
We never have that happen, to be honest.
It's
never seen
very
migration
rare.
only fail for one.
So tomorrow you're going to have a really interesting day.
Yeah, thanks.
Now that you said that. You said that. Tomorrow's going to be real interesting.
The database per customer is like, when I first got there, I was like, this is horrific. Like, I'm not keen on this. And I was planning a project to sort of bring us all back into one. But there's actually been a lot of upsides to it. And there is a lot of ops to do with database stuff. But like, when you have those bugs that are really hard to track down, and you can restore a point in time for one customer and go in and QA and basically recreate that exact scenario, that is extremely powerful in terms of debugging and that sort of thing. So, and being able to just like when you have a really thirsty customer for a certain feature, being able to just give them early access to it on a staging environment where if it's fucked, like it's just them that's going to suffer, that's also quite powerful as well. So when you're up against a deadline and you said you were going to deliver something and they're paying you and all that sort of stuff, like just being able to move that down. And at the moment, we're looking at our big customers and we're going like, oh, maybe if you pay us an extra $1,000 a month, we'll put you on your own database server. And then you won't have noisy neighbor effect sort of thing and stuff like that. So we can derive another income source out of that as well. So it seems terrible on the face of it, it is, but there's actually been a lot of upsides that I hadn't anticipated at the start. So
It's also probably nice from like even just like jumping into their database and trying to work out the state of it. And
yeah,
you don't have everyone else's data in there as well.
What's the company ID again?
Yeah. And every table you're querying to find this stuff, you have to add their company ID.
Yeah.
You've also got less likelihood of accidental data leakage across customers as well.
Yeah. And being
Different usernames for examples,
being able to work balance the customers across database services is quite powerful as well. So I don't know how you guys go scaling like single instances. Like I haven't had to do that for a very long time. So it's been nice.
I just make terrible software that no one wants to scale anything.
We just let Amazon do that. The raw circles too. Is absolutely. How much money? How much money?
We did make money.
Have you had a crash yet?
No.
Well, that's the big thing. The moment raw serverless 2 we change the state of crash.
Don't change the state.
Apparently it's a known problem.
Yeah.
So
How crash is that?
tomorrow.
Friday. Alex, you got a late comment. It's all right.
I thought you left up.
Do you have any other questions? as well?
Yeah, why do you have 400 repos?
10 years, lots of developers, and so
You haven't learned the
microservices was amazing, wasn't it?
I haven't learned the mono repo yet.
Well, no, it's we went through and did a repo audit about 12 months ago. They're not all active, but what was funny was you kind of look at them and you look at like where a company grew from, and it's always the thing. Whereas if somebody knows something, they don't think anyone else needs to know it because they know it.
So things like, let's put a description on what this repo is. And so then, 3 years later, you're looking at 358 repos that don't have even a description, but you can tell who committed the stuff, so they're going around and finding things out. And that was where a few years back we realized the most important thing up in philosophy is sustainability, sustainable software development. And developers with on costs and whatnot is you're literally throwing $1,000, $1,400 a day up against the wall, right? And if what they produce in their time there, because you want them to produce quality stuff they're proud of, but if that doesn't supersede them and go after they've left to actually keep delivering, it's insane. You've all probably had the thing where you hire this great new gun developer, he comes in, he goes, everything else that was done before me is crap, and I got to rewrite it all. I didn't even look at the stuff that was there. Like, just went,
Just intuition.
and intuition. That's right, 'cause every other time. So 400 repos. So we split. Just to give you context, there's a reason for it. So we have 4 types of repos: projects, which has all our end-to-end testing and all our project level documentation and project level configuration in it. Then we have the app level repos. Then we have libraries. So an app itself might have 4 or 5 libraries because they all compile and run as their own artifacts. And so then they might get pulled into multiple projects across the company. And then in addition to that, and this is the thing that we're sort of amalgamating in, so it'll drop that number down quite a bit, is that we had infrastructure as code repositories that were separated from the app repositories so that the developers wouldn't effectively have the need to get confused with all of our Docker builds and our Terraform, and they have different sort of levels of security, also different pipelines for them. So because the way it was, you could separate things by projects, or by per repo and security, but so you couldn't put the code in the same repos. So there's kind of an order of magnitude thing going on where one app might have 5 or 6 or 7 projects, repos, and now we'll be amalgamating a lot of those back in. We also had separate repos that were just for documentation, POCs, lots of POCs, and each one of them has a separate repo. And you go back and this is like, if you look at each one and you put a cost, but not just cost, potential against it, like there is hours, weeks, months of really smart people pouring themselves into this, and that's something that you're just not in a hurry to get the lead on. So they kind of grow. But yeah, I'd say probably we have a couple of hundred, at least 150 that are active, and we've got some really big products that have been around for a long time. So as they've grown, the services that make them run, it's like marionettes. You've got all these little, all these little dancing puppet sort of thing that all have to dance together at the same time. And it is very, we have some monolithic systems, and we're sort of turning those apart and getting rid of them over time. But we also have systems that are very microservices, and it's, just comes with age, unfortunately.
So every 12 months I go to learn Kubernetes, and then I get about 3 pages. Would you actually use Kubernetes if you were not doing the crazy exchange and running your own service and all that sort of stuff? Like,
so Kubernetes is an orchestration tool. It's two really big benefits. It's an orchestration tool. So all of these issues that we have where a container gets unhealthy or it's not ready to receive traffic, your deploys, your auto healing, your cross area replication. Like we could have all of our 7 sites, we could have them all effectively spanned. So there's so much smarts that come with it, but is it the only solution? You might say, stuff Kubernetes, I'm just going to use ECS because that works for me. You might get 90% of the benefits instead of using Kubernetes, right? For us, it was the path we went down because we had a hybrid infrastructure and we couldn't run ECS in the DC. Also at the time, ECS didn't have some of the features that we needed. So we went down the Kubernetes route and we really adopted it strongly. Like some of the guys we hired just were fantastic, and they taught us and they got us past page 3 because it's a hard book. Like you go, what the hell, right? And and every 6 months there's a whole new version you got to jump to, or even 4 months. So it's keeping on the train. So Kubernetes,
I love it now that we're there. It's a hard journey to get to, and there's other options that are serverless, ECS, even EKS is still Kubernetes, but it's made it easier. But really what I would say is that going from VM to Kubernetes really is a journey from VM to Dockerizing, and Kubernetes is just the orchestration arm that makes things stay up, right? So I would wholeheartedly encourage Dockerizing. It comes with its own dangers, like the security implications do not go away. You still have to make sure your Docker containers are secure and everything else. But the Dockerizing part means that you can take whatever you want and run it anywhere. Local dev PC, Google Cloud, Amazon, your own bare metal, doesn't matter. It's going to run the same way, you know. And you know, that's been our package that's given us that universal transportation of anything we want to run. Kubernetes just makes it easy to keep things up and running.
I think the benefits, containers, serverless, however you want to go about dealing with that is actual mutable containers. Right? So mutable deployments for us were the secret sauce. The fact that in order to make a change in production, the only way to do it was to go through a pipeline, which means that we can put a whole bunch of management and control around how code finds its way into production. In the VM days, it was a case of, oh, I've misconfigured something. Let me just SSH onto that server and change the environment that I want running VMware. While I'm here, let me just open Vim and change the source code file. Full time, come on. Yeah, so whether you end up using like containers, whether that's K8s or ECS, Fargate or whatever, and you'll find, I mean, even class we run, there's a little bit of Fargate because Lambda has its own runtime constraints, 15-day execution time, which is plenty for a web application. You run up against it in certain workloads like WebSockets, for instance, where you get persistent serving, or there are definitely batch jobs we run that take longer than 15 minutes. And yeah, we can break the job down and we can hide the data across queue workers and so on and so forth and throw more queue data. We do that. Occasionally, it's good to have something that's running as a daemon. Just a daemon. We use Fargate for that. Again, that's mostly cost control. Things that most of what we do around our serverless infrastructure across the board, there is less so into it, is that it's a cost control measure. It completely changes the economics of running software. But yeah, I think the key takeaway for me that regardless of how you're doing it is to get to a world where a deployment is effectively standing up a new environment, not overriding it.
So talk us through observability. Observability.
So we're using, yeah, observability is great. It's, what do you use?
Is there a time?
Probably.
So we use
When everyone else falls asleep or decides they're uncomfortable enough to leave now.
We use CloudWatch for a lot of it. So if you are running stuff in Lambda, there's a Lambda way that you can install, which then gives you Lambda insights, which tells you everything about how much memory things they're using, how much they're costing you, how long they're running, whether they're in an error state. There's like pages and pages and pages of metrics. From those, you can then build up alerts. You can pop those alerts into ops tuning or page tuning, whatever you like. We use, in November, AWS launched their own real-time user monitoring thing, which is kind of like discount Datadog. It's actually pretty good for what we use it for. So that's how we're observing like real-time user feedback to what the user's actually experiencing. We use synthetic canaries that are hitting certain pages and checking uptime and making sure that they're meeting uptime measures. We have dashboards that are pumping metrics into Prometheus server and then serving that up in Grafana that's sort of showing the health of all of the non-Lambda services that are running. So, you know, if we do have a Fargate instance running, what's it doing? Loads and loads of alerts, and then watching dashboards during deployments. So you do have a little bit of, when you do merge the code, yeah, a robot's going to deploy it for you, but you know a robot's going to deploy it for you, so you can watch it and you can sort of see whether or not there are spikes getting into it. How to solve observability is probably way beyond the scope of this conversation, but being able to understand how your code is running. And I think the bit we tend to miss is we're really good at looking at the infrastructure that our code is running on. And is it healthy? Yeah, it is. Like Bruiser and what it is actually experiencing. We actually recently discovered that some of the biggest performance problems we were having had nothing to do with our infrastructure and everything to do with really inefficient React components. Being able to observe that is because someone can deploy a really inefficient React component in a deployment, and that's going to change what users are experiencing, and you better have some way of understanding that that has happened. Otherwise, it's weeks and weeks and weeks before someone happens to rip the profile up and go, oh, that's not my idea. Yeah, alerts, alarms, PagerDuty, follow the sun. So put everyone on call duty. We do deploy right afternoons at 2 minutes to 5 before people go on holidays. That's when we dispatch on. So band if it hurts, do it more often. So deploying on Fridays, make sure that deployments on Fridays don't break. I also am the one that takes the on-call over the weekend, so I don't put my team through the time. I'm gonna make them do it.
So that means the team faces no consequence.
They deploy on Friday. They only deal with that Sunday mornings.
On Saturday deployments, that's nice.
No, I've done a few of those. Well, hot pieces.
Might actually do a deep dive at some point. It would be a good one to show the different layers of observability around, particularly that PHP stack and everything from network level. Like when something goes wrong, that's where observability is good, because you get to what is wrong quickly. Is it network? Is it infrastructure? Like the actual hardware? Is it VMs? Is it the containers that are running on that? You know, or is it something else like an external service provider you're calling out to that's not responding? And those are the things when observability platforms are about one pane of glass, ideally, where you look at and holistically all those elements are measured and historically reported on, so that when something goes wrong, your time to diagnose is like nothing.
It tells you when it's hurting.
Yeah, ideally as well, your logs are pumped in there as well, so that when you do like highlight the area that's like the time span that's got a problem, all the logs for that application stack are consolidated chronologically together, so you can dig in and go, like, what is it? Or you can click into what errors occurred on that application stack and go, right, I can see exactly what the errors are because I'm diagnosed. It's not network, it's not Cloudflare, you know, it's actually this app. And not only can you see the errors that are being raised by the PHP, but you can also see what the logs that are being reported are. It allows you to just go from what the hell's going on to let's fix this really quickly. So it makes life tremendously easy, but it takes some time and effort to set up. Well worth it.
I think observability is crucially important to complex systems, because I think we try very, very hard to avoid problems happening, but at a certain level of complexity, problem avoidance it's not possible. Things aren't going to break. At a certain level of complexity, despite all of our best efforts, the stuff is going to break in production. Happens to everyone who's running anything that's moderately complex. So you need to get comfortable with that, and the only way to get comfortable with that is to be able to know, particularly if you can tie problems back to specific deployments. That's immensely powerful. If you do have decent rollback strategies or automated rollback strategies that can tie, hang on a second, someone did a deployment, it was this Git shard that specifically caused this problem, I'm going to pull it out straight away. I think I don't know what level of complexity you get to. We passed it quite a while ago. I imagine you passed it quite a while ago as well, but there comes a point where stuff's going to break in production and
Too hard to operate without it.
yeah. And look, if you're not observing, so if you have a complex system and you're not observing it, stuff is broken in production, you just don't know about it. Right?
The point of sustainable stuff as well, and velocity, like that'll just start velocity.
Oh, yeah, totally. And when you do deploy, it's big contract deployment market, depending on the observability tool you're using, and it'll measure either side the response rates from the client's front end, the error rates, and you can have alerts go off. Because honestly, like looking at dashboards, we used to have TV walls up in our old office everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've actually got a whole bunch of boxes. We just haven't put these up. We actually unpacked 2 of these today because we're like, oh, we've got about 5 when you put them up. And with working from home, it's just not been as important. But we actually found people aren't watching dashboards that much anymore. But for business metrics, they do, but not for alerts or infrastructure, because everything's moved from passive, from watching the dashboard and see what's going on to active alerting. So it's all our alerts broken into 2 categories. Ones can be just fixed when we get the time to, and ones that get off your ass and fix it right now because PagerDuty or whatever is, don't use PagerDuty, way too expensive. But you know, there's Go Alert. Have a look up Go Alert. It's you know, it'll just smash your phone and all your friends and everybody else until somebody acknowledges it and owns it. And that's
that's turned it right around. So we're not having to be slaves to the dashboard. So the dashboards are very important for whatever you want to see.
They're more redundant. It's just once you've been working up wayfinding, you then go through the dashboard to figure out where is it hurting, which lines are red, and where do I need to start? Where do I need to start probing? Is this our problem or is this an AWS problem?
So looking forward to our talk next quarter then on observability. And you already offered it, can't take it back. Cool. Awesome. Well, round of applause for Gamma section. Interesting to get some really perspectives and also some different scales. I'm sure that sort of everyone's operating at all sorts of different levels, which you can see. Thanks everyone for coming on today. It was a really good turnout. Lots of good pizza, good drinks, good conversations I hope as well. So look forward to seeing the next one, and congratulations to everyone who won their $20 AWS voucher and their jet thing by going to BrisPHP.com/pizza. Anyway, see you all next time. And if you have a topic talk, lots of stuff, jump onto the meetup page and propose talk. We'll find a talk you'd like to give. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
So you in a way,